Welcome to another episode of Halfway. Tonight we have current president and CEO of the New Jersey Symphony Orchestra joining us, Mr. Terry Loftis. Terry is also a Broadway producer, and I think you're going to love this story. Terry, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Jeremy. Good to see you again. I moved to New Jersey on February 7th of 2025 to take over as the organization's next president and CEO. Jersey Symphony is a 103-year-old symphony orchestra, still considered the state orchestra of New Jersey. We perform the bulk of our concerts at the New Jersey Performing Arts Center, which is here in Newark, where our offices are. The Performance Hall is right down the street. And then 5 other venues around the state, which includes Princeton University, New Brunswick, Red Bank, Morristown, and Newark making the 5th. We'll be moving into a new space in Jersey City, which is right on the Hudson, opposite Manhattan. Hopefully within the next year or so, we'll be opening a 550-seat theater with 2 floors of office space. So a lot going on in a very quick first year. So just celebrated my 1-year anniversary and a lot of work to go on.
So before we get into some of the things you're doing with the orchestra, you were with the Dallas Symphony Orchestra, correct?
I was Chief Advancement and Revenue Officer for the Dallas Symphony Orchestra. What that position entailed was all of fundraising, marketing, events, and then created a small analytics team once I got there to assess and help us determine through research and analytics where we made money from, whether it was philanthropic donations, ticket sales, to help the organization make better decisions on where we spent marketing dollars. So 4 departments, pretty big gig, and was happily doing that until I got poached with this opportunity to move across the country and come to the cold winter of living on the East Coast.
So, I mean, you've been involved in the arts since I've known you.
Mhm.
Is it a small community of people, like when a role opens up, like the New Jersey Symphony Orchestra, is that how you found out about that role? Because I know your background in the creative arts and just how you are with people, and you really just surrounding yourself by good people and good teams. Is some of that part of the process of you getting the current role you're in?
Well, in these type positions with any at this level, it starts with a search firm reaching out saying, are you willing to do a little tire kicking? And you get to that point in your career to where whether you're serious about it or not, it's flattering because someone else sees the value and the work that you've done to date and feels that you would be a viable candidate for advancement with another organization. In this particular case, the search firm that reached out and told me about, I had a relationship with the young man who reached out. He was in the Mamba program at SMU when I was at Taka and was able to speak to his class a couple of times on fundraising. And he remembered me and reached out and said, I've got a potential gig you might be interested in. When he told me who it was, I was intrigued because this orchestra has been on the forefront of innovation and has an outstanding conductor, music director. And I said, well, let's see what happens. Put me in play and let's see where it goes. And so those processes, as you know, can either never go as quickly as the search firm or the candidates would like them to go. But here we are. So it was a big deal, a Dallas boy to pack up and leave and move across the country to be in a new ecosystem and a new job. I was the second executive at the Dallas Symphony Orchestra. And most of my friends and colleagues said, when you make that move, you've done so much in Dallas, it'll be a slight move over. I'm like, no, it's that difference between what I was doing in Dallas and then actually sitting in the CEO's chair. It may seem like a short distance, but it's can be a delta, and the responsibilities just shift and change. So that's how it happened.
You've had a leadership role in pretty much everything that I've known you've been involved with, some projects that you and I've worked on together. But shifting from the Dallas Symphony Orchestra to New Jersey,
Mhm.
is there a little bit more involvement with the creative side and the innovation side? Because I think that's huge, because we always have to be innovation.
That's one of the bigger adjustments in that in Dallas. I would have a say and partner collaboratively with what we call our artistic planning team, which are the folks who actually determine with the music director what music each season the orchestra will play. Moving into the CEO's position here in New Jersey, it's everything. So it's all of marketing, it's all of fundraising, it's all of operations, and it's the artistic side as well. So in that case, each orchestra has a VP of artistic planning that works directly with the music director and the CEO on what we are going to play and when. And so that creative process can be very intense because you have to plan these seasons. Most of us plan seasons years in advance. So we are now planning the 28th season, for example,
Incredible.
because you are looking at artists and oftentimes guest conductors who are booked well in advance. So it's a chess game to make sure that any particular season you get who you want on stage and when our chief music director is not with the orchestras. Yeah, it allows me an opportunity from a creative perspective and a music perspective, but primarily around the music. As you know, my background in jazz and others, this is different. I mean, in some cases, you're looking at new work that's never been performed before, or work sometimes that we're commissioning. But by and large, with the artistic department and the music director, you're planning seasons based on, can we do Tchaikovsky's Fifth Symphony this season? When's the last time we performed it? What did the box office receipts look like the last
Hmm.
time we did it? And is, Jeremy available to guest conduct if we need, a guest conductor? It takes a lot to put an orchestra on stage. And so there is that fun element, fleeting as it can be sometimes because you're also running a business at the same time. But we exist so that Shinjan, our music director, and the orchestra can go out on stage, and then all of the various tentacles that spread off from that, whether it be our youth orchestra program, the work we do in community engagement throughout the various communities of New Jersey. It's a lot. The big difference between here and Dallas is on twofold. One, Dallas is what we call a tier one orchestra, which is based on budget size. New Jersey is a tier two, so we're just slightly under that from a budget perspective. Dallas performs in one venue, which is the Meyerson Symphony Center, and we perform in over five. The good thing is I'm not losing any weight, but I'm not gaining any either because you're just on the go all the time. So,
Yeah, yeah. Well,
and we move
is
the
there
orchestra across the state.
yeah, is there as you are moving, I'm very similar to how maybe like a baseball team scout goes out looking for talent, right? Is that process similar when you're looking at the landscape, trying to figure out who you're going to bring in, other than the things that you want to perform, right? Around the holidays or something that's always going to be in demand from the public. But is there a collaboration, or can you talk about the collaboration that happens when you're trying to find something new?
Finding something new is an entirely different process in that classical music being what it is, it's a unique art form.
Hmm.
And to do this well is a huge, huge hill to climb. And I often tell people you will have certain patrons and supporters when we play new music you'll run into at intermission in a hall and they'll come up and go, that's interesting, but is it really classical music? And one of the things that I like to remind them of is in Mozart's time, he was considered a radical
Hmm.
by contemporaries. And, is what he's doing really classical music? Is it the core of what we do? And you look at that now, and of course, it's one of the staples of any orchestra is to do pieces by Mozart. So everyone has to start somewhere.
Hmm.
And so classical music is no different. So what is incumbent upon us who are in these type positions and who are in artistic roles is not only to maintain what we call our core classics, but also to look and see who is writing for symphonic music for orchestras. And is there a appetite for that? Sometimes it can comes down to the audience makeup regionally. Some symphonies have a much better track record with doing new music than others, but it's something that we have to do for the continuation of the art form because we can't simply survive on just doing what we would call our core classics.
My mother's a patron of the Bass Performance Hall in Fort Worth,
Mhm.
and some weeks and the times that she loves to go, there's things that are what you're describing, the classics. And then the next week, it's going to be the music from John Williams or some other
Or
specialized
films.
event. Yeah, or films. Yeah, any of that, which I always thought's great because then it does attract maybe a different market segment. Maybe some of the younger generation can go in and appreciate that music. And then maybe that's a a hook or an invite to get them to come in and actually maybe experience their first symphony. That's always interesting. So does that happen quite a bit? When you're looking for the other category of your performances?
It can. There Our goal is to immerse what we do within a younger constituency, a younger demographic. Uh,
Hmm.
Classical music, um, as we've seen in the news recently this week with a certain actor commenting on opera and ballet. Um, Historically, it's been considered right, wrong, or indifferent an elitist art form made for a particular demographic, white, Caucasian, with money,
Hmm.
and older. And that's not the case. It's not a unfair rap historically. That has kind of been the case. But as an art form, it's an inclusive art form.
Hmm.
I would not be in this job had I not been exposed to music at a young age by my mom. And I played trumpet, I played French horn, and those experiences and learning music contributed to where I am today. Being CEO of a symphony was not on my list of things to do, but that background in music helps me relate to this art form, to this industry, and to our musicians on stage and my music director in ways that someone who is a good business guy and manager, which I like to consider myself to be, but also have that artistic component as well to say, I'll never know what it's like to sit on stage and be a professional classical musician, but having a background rooted in the arts, specifically music, helps considerably.
Take us there. Take us back to your childhood and how music started for you. I know you mentioned your mother. You got into jazz, but like tell us that story and how all of this began.
Yeah, so this kind of begins on a field trip in grade school to the music hall at Fair Park, where the Dallas Symphony used to perform, and the opera for a long time. And it was on a field trip to the symphony, and they were doing, I forget the title, but it was basically classical music and cartoons. They had a very, very basic, rude screen system set up at music hall on that giant stage with the orchestra. And so it was a lot of Bugs Bunny doing Rossini, doing Wagner. All of us of a certain age grew up with Elmer Fudd chasing Bugs Bunny and Bugs switching into various disguises, usually in drag, trying to evade Elmer Fudd. But
When he
there
put on the
was
blonde wig, that got me every time.
yeah, but they did the Barber of Seville, which is Elmer on stage and with Bugs. And there's a little horn interlude in there with the French horn. And I heard it. Remember, ask, what is that?
Mm,
And at the time, my mom's like, "That's a horn," and I'd never seen one until then. Long story short, I said, I want to play that, and I want to play trumpet." So I started on trumpet actually, and mom said, "Yeah, you can't play an instrument." And I said, "Why?" She goes, "Because you don't like math, and music is reading music is all about numbers and counting and knowing when to come in and when not to come in, how to count breaths and rest." And to prove her wrong, I'm like, well, I'm going to do this. And I did, and went from trumpet to eventually to French horn. So as grade school, by the time I got to middle school, I was playing trumpet in the jazz band and French horn and kind of a wind ensemble. Was grade school, middle school was tough. My parents divorced in the late 70s. We stayed with mom, and things got really, really tough for a number of years. Mom was taking care of three kids, two of which were playing horns, and a sister that was learning to dance classically. And she worked multiple jobs to make sure that she was taking care of us. But there were some days, weeks, and months to where, short of having a roof over our heads, we would have been considered homeless, and we got through it all. And it wasn't easy. But the bullying, there was a lot of bullying,
mm,
because I was
yeah,
a band nerd, in South Oak Cliff, where in a particular time, understanding and comprehension was not something that people wanted to do.
yeah,
Teachers, of course,
yeah,
but kids can be pretty cruel. But all that said, I was pretty good. I was never going to be the world's next Miles Davis on jazz trumpet or be able to play first chair in a symphony orchestra, but I was good enough to be accepted to the Arts Magnet, which is the Booker T. Washington High School for the Performing and Visual Arts.
hmm,
And that was a game changer. It took me out of my neighborhood environment, South Oak Cliff High School would have been my home school had I stayed. Nothing wrong with SOC, but during that particular time, it would not have been in my best interest to end up there. And the Arts Magnet was just a game changer. Here was a school that opened in 1976, solely dedicated to the arts, dance, visual art, music, and theater. And you're in an ecosystem of kids your own age that don't necessarily look like you, which was even better because the level of diversity that was there was incredible.
Yeah, yeah.
The support from the faculty, whether they're on the academic side or on the artistic side, was remarkable. And I tell people those 4 years probably saved my life and are if I have a cornerstone of my building, it's the 4 years I spent at that campus that was the catalyst for everything that has come since then.
Yeah, and the kids are a product of their environment. And right before I met you, I spent time at a high school in Oak Cliff, and I taught at Sunset High School, and I'd left
Mhm.
the film industry full time. And one of the most special experiences that I was able to be a part of in that school was writing recommendations for students that wanted to go to Booker T. Washington.
Mm.
And I I wrote several, and I remember two of them in particular. One was a percussion student, and he came to me one day, and he knew that if he stayed in that area, it was not going to be good for him.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a lot of gang activity, surrounded by drugs. I saw stuff in the 2 years that I was at that school that just any anybody living outside of that area, or maybe living in a bubble in a private school or a private community, just would be shocked. And these kids dealt with this every single day. So I was very close to how can I better serve these students? How can I
Yeah.
understand? And so I just made a point to have conversations with them. And this one particular one, I'll never forget. He came to me and he had just gotten into a fist fight, and I'm the one that broke it up. And I said, "You can't be doing this." I was like, "You've got an application to do. I'm writing you a letter of recommendation. You can't be doing this. This is your golden ticket." And he goes, "Mr. Roden, I understand." It was kind of a moment for him to kind of slow down and go, "This is the time you need to listen, not just to act on emotions," right? And I remember that moment very clearly. And then a couple months later, he came to me and told me he got in, and it was just like a lot of tears of joy, in that moment. And then after I'd left, and after I'd gone to Richland College, where you and I met, and we worked on some projects together. My wife and I were at the Dallas Museum of Art one day, walking down the sidewalk, and I hear this loud "Mr. Roden" behind me, and I turn around, and it's this particular student.
Well,
And I learned that he was actually touring. He was doing this, and so it was such a great environment. So you telling that story about being in that building, in that community of artists that had like-minded interests, and you were insulated from the stuff if you had gone to a different high school, that shaped you, right? And then that friction that you were dealing with, both at home, your parents' divorce, that's what I like to call that messy middle, and that's what ends up shaping us because it becomes a lesson. Like, how can I move forward? So, can you elaborate a little bit more and kind of how you then took that information, graduated, and then took next steps? Because I know also you have a brother that's in music.
yeah. So my sister's still in Dallas. Had she was she and I were at the school at the same time. I think my sister went in. My sister transferred from Roosevelt and Oak Cliff as a junior into the program, and I came in as a freshman. My little brother came in after us both
Okay.
and played saxophone. Still is an accomplished tenor saxophone player to this day. We are now closer together. He's in Brooklyn. I'm in New Jersey, so it's a 30-minute drive or train ride over. But yeah, so all three of us went to high school on that campus. And to go back a little bit further, our parents met on that campus when it was still an all-black high school in the 60s.
Wow.
So they met at school, got pregnant, graduated. It was one of those weird movie moments you fast forward and your three kids are now in the same building getting their high school education that your parents did. Um, while not unusual, but the building, the neighborhood, the campus means a lot to me and my family.
Do you still serve on the board of Booker T?
I am now on what's called the President's Council, which is where those board members are allowed to go if they still have some connection or relevance to what the board is doing. And they very kindly allowed me to stay on the president's council, but I'm not on the active board anymore. That building and the people who were in it when I was there and the relationships that I made stuck their lifetime. My best friend in high school is still my best friend to this day, going to school with Edie Brickell before there was the New Bohemians. Yeah. So from an early perspective, yeah, those early years of learning to play music and being on that campus and being, as you well know, a great networker and storyteller resulted in the years that I was in advertising. So when I finished high school and went to Eastfield College, which is now part of Dallas Colleges, formerly the Dallas County Community College District,
Hmm.
was another life-altering experience. At the time, Kurt Bradshaw was the jazz studies director at Eastville. Brilliant, but he was who I auditioned for at Arts. So
Really?
yeah, so the summer that I auditioned to get into the program, he was still director of jazz studies at the high school. And then over the course of the summer, accepted the gig at Eastville. So by the time I started school, Kurt was gone. But when I graduated, and ended up at Eastville, Kirk was still there running the jazz studies program there. And that was another amazing. They had a big band. I had started singing more then as well as playing trumpet. So I did both. Eventually gave up horn playing and just stuck to singing. Had I been smart when I was a kid, I would have started singing earlier. I'm a much better singer than I was ever a horn player. But it was in that period that I got a job as and a bank, was working and paying my own tuition through college, and that networking side of me, which was rooted in curiosity. So I was always fascinated with how people, how did Kurt Bradshaw sit down in his office on a Monday morning after being inspired over the weekend to either write an original piece for the band or an arrangement for the band, and within 24 hours helping him copy charts for something that just came out of his head. How did the president of Eastville get to be president of a college? So my natural curiosity and how careers advanced, education, resulting in various career options. I knew I did not want to be in banking. But I started sacking groceries like a lot of kids do at a grocery store at a Tom Thumb. But even there, started building relationships.
Hmm.
And some of those folks I still know to this day. And so the one common denominator is my love of people
Hmm.
and their experiences and how those people have contributed directly or indirectly to my livelihood and career, or just personal relationships. And then I ended up at an internship at a media buying company. And that internship led into decades of being in the advertising and marketing business, where started my first little agency because I knew everything in my early 20s and was going to conquer the world. And when that failed, miserably failed, I went to work for an agency, learned the business. And then by the time you and I met, of
Hmm.
course, I had my own agency in Dallas for a number of years. But during that process, started to join a lot of nonprofit boards, because then you're on the radar, either because someone's wanting you to donate, or then the more questions you ask on certain boards, you start being asked to be in more leadership positions.
You had your advertising and marketing agency
Mhm.
hat, but then you had this dotted line over to serving on a board or the philanthropy side. I mean, that's kind of what I do with my professional side, but then also the education side, right? There's a piece of me that I always want to be there, and that sounds like you're the same way. Because as long as I've known you, you've served on some board or been involved with the community. So can you go a little bit deeper there?
Yeah, so a lot of that started to unfold when when I started what my first agent was called the first one was called Media Resources. And interestingly enough, my largest account was Hertz. I did a lot of summer promotional work for Hertz, and they were the proverbial egg, only apple in the basket, so to speak. And at the time, they were here in Parsippany, New Jersey. It's weird to have a Jersey connection. And then that failed again because, that was the one I knew everything and was going to conquer the world, but did not have a diverse background of clients. And so when Hertz went away, didn't happen immediately, but the agency went away. And then I decided I'm really good at this, but I need to uh, put my ego to the side and actually learn the business. So I did that with another agency called TFA Communications. They're in Dallas. And then they were acquired by Leo Burnett. So for
Mm.
a brief period of time, I was an employee of Burnett. But over the course of this trajectory, and then leading up to the Blake agency, which I sold to a group in Sweden called Adera. And then after that love affair ended, started Verve Communications Group, which I had with Jeff Martin for, gosh, I don't know, about 14, 15 years.
Yeah, yeah.
But over the course of that trajectory, started joining committees of boards, getting more involved in the whether it be the arts. I remember at one point I was board chair of the Resource Center of Dallas, which is a LGBTQIA organization in Dallas, Friends of the Katy Trail, and Booker T. Washington's advisory board. All three at various points were in capital campaigns. So the high school was building its new campus. The Katy Trail, as anyone knows in Dallas, is a marvel. But when I joined that board, we were starting fundraising for what it's a city-owned park, but there's a 501c3, the Friends of the Katy Trail, that manages it and raises all the money. I can remember being hard hats with board members up on what was the old Katy railway line that was still up there. So when we started, the railroad tracks were still there. And then the Resource Center of Dallas, I was board president for a while and left the board, came back and helped finish out a capital campaign for the space that they're in right now. Those opportunities to serve in a nonprofit board and just opened up more relationships, more networking that did benefit me professionally, but more than anything else, gave me a great opportunity to work in the philanthropic sandbox of Dallas, to where to this day I have a lot of great relationships with a lot of great organizations, which would come in really, really in a meaningful way once I moved into the nonprofit sector to work in, because I had an ecosystem of relationships and contacts that I had cultivated over the course of my career. So it's been an interesting ride. So when closed Verve, I ended up at Eisenberg and Associates, which is another
Right,
Dallas
right. I remember that.
institution.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep. Great design firm owned by Arthur Eisenberg. Left Eisenberg and went to work for a hedge fund that was based in Manhattan that produced and financed Broadway shows. They're still knocking out of the park. Great organization. And went from there to TACA, which is the Arts Community Alliance, which is a grant-making arts 501c3 in Dallas. That grants funding through application grants to the cultural arts in North Texas. It's been around since 1967. Was hired as through a search process, became their president and executive director.
How long were you there again?
I started at TACA in October of 2019, and I was there for about 3.5 years. Right on the edge, the leading edge, so to speak, of COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And then that happened and blew everyone's world to bits and pieces. But out of that, something interesting happened, because TACA fundraises for its grants, and then there's a period of ongoing fundraising, and then the grant period cycle to where 501c3s would apply for grant funding. With COVID, it created such havoc in the arts community, whether you were a large arts organization like the DMA or the Dallas Symphony or the Dallas Opera, down to small theater companies or dance companies. It was an interesting bedfellow in that it allowed TACA, while I was there, to raise more money for the arts in Dallas, but then had some very innovative people on the TACA board, one couple in particular, Kevin and Carol March, who came to me with another board member and presented this idea of providing grants to nonprofits during COVID that were moving forward with programming in a safe environment for their livelihood. So you would see dance companies doing performances in parking garages or out in outdoor spaces, theater companies doing the same thing.
Hmm.
Performing arts was hit pretty hard. You could not, choirs, symphonies, some other forms of live music was a
Even
bit.
volunteer groups that were trying to find venues. I remember serving a community that I volunteered with for years. We could not find a venue to host a gala, a
Yeah,
fundraising gala because
yeah,
of a lot of the same issues. Yeah.
yeah. You couldn't, it just wasn't safe to do it indoors. And so, those two words that we all remember during COVID: pivot and resiliency.
Yes. Yes.
Um,
Very much.
and resiliency is something that I attribute to Taka and our donors. They really stepped up to support the core operations of the nonprofits that we funded. But the March Family Foundation was instrumental in that they funded what eventually became Taka's pop-up grants program, which if you were moving forward with programming, you could be nominated and receive a pop-up grant for whatever that was. So let's say, you ran a small theater company and you were going to do a production, but it was going to be over just one weekend and in a parking garage.
Hmm.
You could be nominated for a pop-up grant. So that was allowing us to continually support organizations during COVID. Then the same family came back and said, well, this is going well, but how do we put more money into the hands of individual artists who are a part of this programming? And so they funded that as well, very generously, to where if you were in set production or dance recital, the artists that were involved in those productions were then getting funds as well. It was still funneled through the 501c3, but let's say you were an actor in one of these productions, we would make funding available that would go to the artists. They could be actors, musicians, stage hands, lighting people, production crews that are helping dancers, whatever. So it allowed Taka to raise the bar from an innovation perspective. And I would love to take credit for it, but it was not my idea. This again comes from collaborating and networking with your core. In our case, we're board members who saw a need and said, we need to address this. And not only that, we will fund it. So that's the best of both worlds. TAC is a great organization. I'm still very involved with the folks over there and some of their board members. But after TACA, I was approached by the former CEO of the Dallas Symphony. Her name is Kim Knoll to me, about a position that she was going to create, which was Chief Advancement and Revenue Officer. And so she kind of created this position, posted it, and was over a little bit of Barola for her one night and too much scotch for me, kind of sketched out what the roles and responsibilities would be. And I remember telling her at the time, this sounds great. And if I can think of some unicorn to take this job, I'll let you know. Not thinking in that space at that particular moment that, I was one of the unicorns that she wanted to consider. But that was an interesting period in that I obviously ended up in that position. And I had no idea that how life changing it would be.
Hmm.
So I think it was a New Year's Eve concert, my first holiday season there. And I would go and sit in the grand tier of the Meyerson when the orchestra was in rehearsal and just sit there and either answer emails on my laptop or just get out of the office and just go and sit and immerse myself in what we do. My mom was texting me and I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden, we were doing this one particular program for New Year's Eve, I think included the Barber of Seville, and the orchestra started rehearsing it. And so I call mom, and I just put my phone on speaker and held the phone up so she could hear the music. And then I walked out of the hall, not to disturb the orchestra. And she said, "Oh my God, you've come full circle.
Wow. Back when
You,
she was first telling you that, no, music, it's about
yeah,
numbers and
yeah."
wow.
And here I am working for an amazing orchestra with an amazing music director in Fabio Luisi. And I got goosebumps. The universe, God has let me here for some reason. And that little kid sitting at the music hall at Fair Park asking, what is that instrument? What is that sound? I love the DSO. I love the Dallas um, arts philanthropic ecosystem.
Hmm.
Is donors that stepped up in big ways during COVID to make sure organizations did not fail. Again, large, medium, and small organizations. Dallas is a different animal when it comes to support of the arts. There's a lot more that can be done given the
Hmm.
portfolio of billionaires that are in the North Texas area that could I hope I'm not getting in trouble for saying this, but I can say it because I'm not there anymore. They could be doing more
Hmm.
in support of the arts in Dallas from a cultivation perspective, from a
Sure.
funding perspective that could benefit legacy institutions like the Dallas Symphony, the Dallas Theater Center, the Opera, the DMA, but more importantly, down through the entire ecosystem of supporting the arts as a whole, because Dallas is the arts district has assisted in putting Dallas on the map, but it also needs to move forward in a cultivation and support of the arts and artists to where it can retain the talent that's there from an artist perspective so that they don't feel the need to move to New York or LA to make a
Right.
living.
So let me ask you two questions there. So if you look at, the Fort Worth, arts area, we got Bass Performance Hall, Sundance Square. There's always kind of stuff happening down there. Then you have Houston. My niece is now part of a ballet company in Florida, but has performed all over the place. She's traveled through all these cities in various productions. And you go to these cities and you're like, oh, wow, the arts are very much valued in this city. Do you think that there was some inspiration, let's go back to COVID really quick. Everybody was sitting in their house, and all of these artists that could not perform in these venues or were part of some residency in some city, right? Do you think that inspired some of the fundraising after COVID to make sure those things did not fail and the projects that were happening in those cities continue to move forward? Because I remember, as terrible as COVID was, the community and gathering that happened in the living room, watching the performances of artists, was truly magical, and it brought a lot of us close together. But do you think some of that inspired those projects to continue?
Absolutely. There are arts organizations, and that's why I call COVID an interesting bedfellow, that brands were elevated more because of it, because of what they were able to do in very creative and innovative ways because of the pandemic.
Hmm.
It goes beyond just having to perform in unusual spaces, whether that be outdoors, parking garages, what have you. The programming has to be on par. And what was beautiful to see during my time at Taka were some of the small to mid-sized organizations who were being really innovative in what they were presenting. So it was not just the fact that they were moving forward with programming, the programming they were doing was relevant to what was going on.
Hmm.
So it wasn't a theater company necessarily doing the classics. It may be a theater company doing something that was rooted in what that life experience of going through COVID was at the time. African American theater company is one that comes to mind. Soul Rep Theater Company, which has been around for some time. The principals of the company, some of them still teach at my high school at Arts Magnet, and were always on Taka's radar, but produce some of the most astounding theater work that I've seen by virtue of the fact that they had to pivot and come up with a different way to produce art in a very confined environment and were successful at it. To your point, post all of that, organizations who were getting funding but not in substantial amounts are now thriving and have built their own fundraising mechanisms to where they're doing a hell of a lot better today than they were pre-COVID. Um, so it did open up an opportunity to and open the eyes of the philanthropic community in Dallas that was always and had been generous, but now had to do it on a micro level and go, this dollar is going to make the most impact here.
Hmm.
But that's not to discount the work that the legacy arts organizations in Dallas are doing. The Dallas Symphony was the first symphony in America to put musicians back on stage.
Yeah.
It may have been a handful of musicians spread 6 to 8 feet apart. And in the hall, you've been in the Meyerson, it's a big space. And they started doing that. I was on the board before I joined as a member of the team. And you might have 25 patrons in the hall scattered around the enormity of the hall. But they didn't do it as a money-making ploy because, it was actually costing money to do it. Kim and the management team at the DSO at the time and the board felt that it was important to come back in a way that was meaningful for not only musicians but for the art form. The DMA did a lot of great work during COVID. And so a lot of organizations, legacy, mid-size and small, benefited oddly from what they were from innovation that was forced upon them because of the pandemic.
Yeah, yeah, responding to changing conditions, absolutely.
Yeah,
And I love the Dallas Arts. I don't know if you ever knew this, but about the time I met you, I met my wife on a blind date in front of the Nasher Sculpture Center.
I did not know. Yeah,
Yeah, blind
wow.
date. My sister and her sister introduced us together, and we emailed back and forth. We talked over the phone, but we met on a blind date in front of the Nasher. And there's a photograph that I'll have to share with you of us standing outside the Nasher. And I've gone back and done some fun things and had some of the staff say, hey, I'm going to surprise my wife outside. This is where we met. But the arts community, and the Trammell Crow building, it was across the street, all the
Yep.
Auguste Rodin sculptures used to be everywhere. I mean, I spent so much time when I was at UNT in their art school undergrad. I would go to downtown Dallas as much as I could to spend time in the DMA and just in the arts. And I was like, God, this could be so much more. And just to see it continue to grow and build is absolutely inspirational. And so, and also I think you going back to COVID and the living room performances, I think it also inspired other artists to be doing things online and also invited them to explore maybe some of the performances that were having to pivot and perform maybe in a different environment because they couldn't perform in their venue. Speaking of that, how have you, whether it's currently at the New Jersey Symphony Orchestra, Dallas, Taka, wherever, how are you embracing the explosion of social media when people, weren't going to the movie theater to see movies. They were going to watch the streaming version in their house. How are you tackling that animal? Especially after this explosion after COVID changed everything.
Yeah, everyone tried to take digital content and monetize it, and we're forced to because you didn't have your regular subscribers being able to show up at your theaters or your concert halls. Some did that very well. Dallas Black Dance comes to mind during COVID when they started doing their performances outside and other places. The team there did a great job of putting up that content and making money on it. It helped them expand their brand globally. And so now, fast forward to where I sit now as president and CEO in Jersey, is it's a different animal in that social media is a huge component of what we do, but what we're putting up and how. So this being such a unique art form, we have to think of ways of not only maintaining our core supporters, which are great supporters of a certain age that necessitates us as an industry and as an art form doing what we can to plant seeds and cultivate a younger demographic. Well, how do you
Mhm.
do that? Well, I used to joke with my nephews all the time. When Uncle had his first car phone, it was literally a car phone. It was an audio box mounted into the car. And, in my 1987 Nissan Stanza with the sunroof. And I thought I was so cool. And now you add not only the advent of social media, you add what AI is doing now, which is changing everything.
Mhm.
And how do you stay relevant? And how do you take an art form that is considered, right, wrong, or indifferent, elitist, and make it accessible to everyone? Well, you do it by doing that. You make it accessible to people. You do it by the work we do in education with our youth orchestras. You do it by putting what we do into neighborhoods as opposed to expecting all of our constituencies to come into one of our performance venues. Before our time here today, my last call was with the members of our orchestra committee that I have on a regular basis. I told them, I was like, they asked, how's it going? And it's like, well, I'm playing checkers, Chinese checkers, and chess at the same time, and the rules change daily. And from a social perspective, you've worked in, you've have a hand in marketing. You're obviously doing this, which is its own form of marketing. It's content driven. It has to be relevant, but it has to be distributed and done in a way to where it's engaging for people to actually take part of
Be
and
a
stop
story
and
to it.
say, this
Yeah.
looks interesting.
Yeah.
While I'm flipping through Instagram or TikTok, this one thing captures my attention. And what we're learning in the classical music world, especially in my role here in New Jersey, is looking at the future and how we're going to be doing marketing campaigns socially, is using music and visuals to tell the story, as opposed to we're going to do Mozart. So let's do a social media post that's a picture of Mozart, the name of the work that we're playing. And if it's got a guest conductor or a guest artist, we'll throw their picture in there too. Okay, big deal. When you're trying to appeal to an audience that has no idea who Mozart is, and believe me, we're there.
Yeah.
You have a
Yeah.
demographic of young people who don't know Beethoven or Mozart or Tchaikovsky.
Chopin. One of my favorites
Yeah,
is Chopin. Yeah.
taking advantage of these platforms to say, based on the piece itself, how can we create content that tells this story better than showing the composer's face, in some cases that have been dead for hundreds of years, relative to what their lives might look like to the best that we can. So if you are my principal trombonist, whose name is Levi, he was a very young guy, he's not even close to 30 yet. What does Levi's world looks like off stage? And how does that impact what he does on stage? They're
Mm.
almost, so what I want to be creating in the future, probably next season, is storytelling and using dynamic content with real people, real musicians, staff, board members in their environments. So, I might do something like this, sitting with Levi at a coffee shop on the Hudson with Manhattan in the backdrop. And a digital platform is key to that success in telling a story about a very old art form and why it's relevant to people's lives today, but doing that with people and with visuals that is relatable. So, because let's face it, culture defined means different things generationally. So,
Absolutely. Well, the other day I had come in from the workshop. It was over the weekend, and I was singing a song that would probably be considered classic rock. And my son looks at me across the room and goes, "How do you know that?" Right? And it was a Pink Floyd song, right? If you want to consider Pink Floyd classic rock. Wasn't the Wall, wasn't the Wall. It was High Hopes. And so it was High Hopes was something that came out in the 90s, but there was some playlist, I guess it was on Spotify or one of his playlists. We share a one of those Bluetooth speakers. Anyway, I'm singing this. He's like, "How do you know that song?" I was like, "Jack, that came out when I was in high school." But they get exposed to this music, but at the same time, they're also getting exposed to some of the classics, whether it's symphony music
mhm,
or classic rock or rock and roll or even grunge. I'm a grunge era kid, because now the social media templates on TikTok and Instagram and all of these various apps, they're doing these mashups of those originals, right? And they're using them as background music
yeah,
and scores to their content.
yeah.
And so I think it's very ironic that they're making that connection, thinking that it's brand new music. No, dude, that came
Oh, it's
out.
not. Yeah. If you were, you've got kids, and I remember the first version of Atari, and compared to where games are today, it's just a different solar system. But I'm reminded of one Christmas being at my mom's, and my nephews were there doing Christmas presents and everything, and they got whatever the latest video game was, or console, whatever they call these things.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
We were talking about music, and we were talking about classical music. This is before I went to work for the DSO. And my youngest nephew's like, what is that? I don't think I've ever heard classical music before. What does that mean? And I said, can you turn off the audio on your game and just have the music track run? And he said, yeah. So he did it. I was like, what you're hearing is a form of classical music. I said, now let's move that forward. So he was probably middle school. Now he's graduated and in college. And so before I left the DSO, they came to one of them. I forget which movie we did, but they came. And you've got an audience full of people watching an orchestra play a score while the movie's being shown on stage. I call this educating people on what they already know. They know that there's a track or a music, but to the notion that that's an orchestra somewhere in a studio when
Hmm.
these films are being made, i.e., anything by John Williams,
Yeah,
then this light bulb goes off. There's this fascination, especially with kids, because it's so cool to sit and watch that and go, wow, they're really playing while the movie's going on. So it's that immersion. Um, Darth Vader would not be Darth Vader without John Williams. Wouldn't be as menacing, wouldn't be as scary without the Imperial March. Indiana Jones would be nothing without John Williams. Danny Elfman's work. So there's a myriad of an entire ecosystem. The challenge is, while that's great, we have to be careful not to think that by bringing in new audiences into our concert halls, because we did Harry Potter last weekend here in New Jersey, that is going to migrate over to getting that demographic to come and listen to Tchaikovsky. It's not. What it does do is allow us to introduce the art form again in a way that people aren't necessarily accustomed to thinking about it, because it's visual right there in front of them. There's an orchestra on stage while you're watching the movie. That's classical music. And so when you look at introducing what we do to a younger audience, film is a great way to do it, but that conversion is not going to be, they're going to come to four movies over the course of a season or two and then buy a classical subscription. They may do a date night to come to a classical concert, but it takes time. None of this stuff happens with the flip of a quarter, and it's ever changing. I can guarantee you the CEO in Dallas, wonderful CEO, Michelle Miller Burns, and all of my counterparts around the country, Kim Noltemy, who hired me, is now CEO of the LA Philharmonic. Some of these issues are common. How we deal with them is probably slightly different, but the need for this immersion to take place as young as possible. So then you look at education programs. So I have 300 kids in my youth orchestra program over 4 groups, kind of a beginners, intermediate, advanced, and really advanced. And whether these kids, Jeremy, ever pursue a career or higher education in music is irrelevant. The fact that they are learning and are proficient at music will rewire their brains. It helps them in every other area of their lives,
Creative problem
academically.
solving. Yeah, I
Yeah.
completely agree with you. Yes.
And
Yeah.
it is incumbent upon us to make sure that we are making this accessible and available, whether someone wants to play classical French horn or jazz trumpet, because programs and arts funding is not what it used to be. When I was in school, my first cornet that I played, the school provided for me, because there was, this is back in a time where most schools had a band and had not a big supply of instruments, but you could check out an instrument. If no one else played the cornet, it was yours for the school year. That doesn't exist anymore unless they're specific music programs at specific campuses. I never owned a French horn in high school. I used a horn that the school provided. Dallas Symphony had a great education program. I have a great one here that I'm very proud of. And when I go to our rehearsals, when these kids are rehearsing early on Saturday mornings, small, medium, and large kids, and the commitment, the dedication, the younger they are, the more awful it sounds if they've just started. I can't imagine what my mom went through with me playing trumpet and my brother playing saxophone. But then watching our Academy Orchestra, which is our top youth orchestra, and watching these kids and how they sound and going, I could put this whole group on stage with my orchestra. They're that good.
Yeah. One of the most inspirational performances I've seen from a youth orchestra, and it's been probably 10 plus years, but one of my favorite bands, Collective Soul, they're from Atlanta, and they did just a collection of their songs with the Atlanta Youth Symphony Orchestra. And if you've never seen that, go on YouTube. They've got the full performance. Ed Roland and his brother, just the entire band. It was so magical because you're watching it, you're like, oh, it's a symphony, right? But then you realize it's a youth orchestra and that those are essentially kids. They're not, veteran symphony performers doing that, and seeing the joy going back and forth and the fun. I listen to that quite often. At least every other month, I'll pull up one of those songs or I'll watch it on my phone. A couple episodes ago, I interviewed a composer, Mark Menza, I worked with back in film, back in 2000, 2001. And he talked about film scoring and music in general. But I do agree with you, hooking in the youth somehow, whether they're going to play professionally or just, enjoy that season of their life. I think it makes an impression on that individual that it's going to carry. Look what you did, right? Look what your brother's doing. Look at maybe, let's kind of go here real quick. A challenging time in your life, Terry. I've known you a long time. Can you talk about a challenging time in your life where music or the creative arts helped move you forward?
Gosh, that's difficult to answer because it's always there. I use music when I'm happy and when I'm depressed. So those that are closest to me, family, relationships, my current relationship, it's either if Terry's singing, depending on what he's singing and when, can tell, my mood.
Hmm.
Um, Probably the most difficult time that music has been a positive influence in a very challenging situation was probably when I was a kid. There was a period after my parents' divorce, as I referenced earlier, where things got really tough for us, and um, we hit a point to where we were still in our home, but there wasn't enough money to keep all the utilities on.
Hmm.
So the four of us, my mom and my brother and sister and I, were in one room, which was the dining room, which became, ground central. So running an extension cord from the window in the dining room to the neighbor's garage for power, doing the same thing for water. I mean, bringing in buckets of water to cook, to bathe, all of those things. And then it got better. Mom eventually, she as her situation changed, our situation changed, but it still wasn't easy. But, we were back in the house, utilities were on,
Hmm.
we never missed a day of school. No one ever knew the struggles that we were going through at school. No one at school knew what we were going through at home, I should say. And it wasn't because we were trying to hide anything. It was just this is what you do. You just get up and you make the
Yeah.
best of the situation and you move on. But the common thread that was through that was my crazy, mom. Even on days, nights where she was just dead tired, working 2 jobs, 3 jobs to take care of us. Music was the thing that kept us sane. So we would routinely play, our we still had turntables back then, which is funny that, we're going back to them now because I just bought one not long ago. Um, but that one thread was music. So whether it was putting on the best of Earth, Wind and Fire or some jazz or whatever the top 40 was of the day, there was a lot of dancing and a lot of singing. And that pulled us through, me as the oldest son, and all of us through a time to where most families and most people probably would not have made it from an emotional perspective because it was a lot to endure, especially when you're a kid. In my own personal life, there have been some other moments, but um, that was a catalytic moment for us because it kind of helped shape us, the three of us and my mom, not from a position of loss, but a position of, with continued blessings, it's only going to get better. But you
Yeah.
have to be in that mindset of um, of acceptance and knowing that where we were at that particular point in time was not going to dictate our long term future. Yeah, and that was critical, and every opportunity I have to talk to kids, that are in difficult situations, whether it be something at home or at school or both, I share bits of my background and my history to say, um, things may look like a nightmare now, but this is just one step along the journey, and how you deal with that now can dictate one way or the other, your future. Had we given up and say,
Yeah.
okay, this is, Terry working at a graduating from high school, getting a job at a grocery store, if you stick with that kid, you might be manager of the store one day. If that had been the ceiling, that would have been the ceiling. Or doing the same thing in banking, which I hated. It's about as exciting as watching paint dry. But because of what we'd already been through, I knew that I wanted something more. And it's been crazy. I mean, from high school till now, it's been a crazy ride. I'm a Tony nominated Broadway producer. Never saw that coming.
Yeah. I don't want this to end and not talk about that moment in your life because I know that was special.
Yeah. So while I was at Eisenberg running an ad agency or a design firm, I should say, I was approached by a dear friend, again, talking about relationships, lifelong relationships.
Yeah.
A good friend of mine who was here in New York and working on Broadway and had transitioned from a performer to a producer. And he called me up and it's like, would you like to help me raise money for a Broadway show? And my first reaction was no. I know nothing about that. And why would you call me? He goes, well, you've helped all these nonprofits in Dallas raise money. And I'm like, those are two entirely different things. One is very philanthropic and one is very risky. But I did it. And it wasn't, I didn't get any producing credits for the first project I worked on. It was Holland Taylor's Anne, based on the life of Governor Richards. It played on Broadway at the Vivian Beaumont Theater at Lincoln Center, and it was a blast. You raise money, people think it's glamorous. You say I'm a Broadway producer. It's a lot of work, and you have to raise a lot of money. But I did it. It was fun, a lot of work, and said, "Thanks, Rich. Hit me up the next time you're in Dallas." Shortly after that, he reached out again. It was about a year or so after that, and said, "I have a co-producer spot on a musical." And I remember saying, Rich, the last one was fun. Love Holland. Of course, a big Ann Richards fan. That was probably the biggest reason I did that was because if you ever saw Holland do that, there are moments when she's on stage doing it where you have to think twice and go, Ann did pass, didn't she?
Yeah. Yeah. I saw Anne speak back when I was in college. It was incredible.
Yeah. So the second one was called The Visit. The book script was written by Terrence McNally. One of the last scores by Kendra Nebb, who did Chicago and a whole bunch of other. Well, they wrote My Way for Frank Sinatra. And so I'm on the phone with Rich, and I'm like, so I'm not interested for this based on our, tell me about it. And I said, okay, who's in it? And he said, John Doyle is directing it. Roger Rees is the male lead, and Cheetah Rivera is the star. And I said, okay, send me the paperwork. So
I remember seeing the social media on this. It's so exciting. I mean, I can't imagine what you're going through.
yeah, so you sign an agreement that with the production company that states you'll raise whatever you've agreed to, and if the show is nominated for best of at the Tonys, best play, best musical, if you're a producer, a co-producer, or producer, that puts you in line for a Tony if it wins best of. The Visit was nominated for 5 Tonys. We did win one. And then, but at that point, you get the bug because, you go to your own opening night of a musical Broadway show and you're seeing people in the audience as patrons that you've only seen on TV, film, on the big screen or on stage. When we did the opening night of The Visit, Tommy Tune, who's a good Texas boy dancer, was sitting right in front of me. And I'm like, this is just wow. And I remember my brother and sister-in-law were there for me for the opening. And I'm having this moment sitting in the theater, and my brother puts his arms around me and he goes, stop trying to figure out how you got here and just enjoy it. And he knew exactly where my head was. And then I went from The Visit to Bandstand, which is another great show. Andy Blankenbuehler was the director on that, who was the choreographer on Hamilton. Great score, great show. Did not get a best of nomination, but won the Tony for best choreography. And yeah, that took my mom to that one. Mom had never been to a Broadway show, let alone an opening, let alone her son's name in the program book as one of the co-producers. But not, not an easy business because it is very risky. Broadway's $1 billion plus industry, and as creative as it is, because the cool part about being a co-producer or a lead producer, or the guys with more resources that bring these things to stage, is the creative process. So what I loved about it, it allowed me to use not only my creativity as an artist, but also in advertising, because I interacted with the agencies of record for all of those shows. So you're looking at what the digital campaign is going to look like and what print and outdoor is going to look like.
Mm-hmm.
How many billboards or digital boards are we plastering Cheetah Rivera's face on for The Visit? Same for Bandstand. And so then I left Eisenberg and then joined the Broadway Strategic Return Fund, which is the hedge fund that I mentioned earlier. And that was a portfolio of shows that mitigated the risk to the investors. So rather than investing a lot of money in one show and just praying that it's going to hit, you're investing in a portfolio. So if a show does not perform well, you're not going to lose your investment.
Right.
Brilliant concept, great guys that run it. And that was a blast because you're not only you're raising money, but you're doing it something in my personal situation that you just loved because it was in the arts. And that was, from there to Taka. So that was that quick trajectory. And I still love it now that I'm here. I'm 20 minutes away from Manhattan. So not that I have a lot of time to go to shows because I don't, but it's different to do what I'm going to do when you and I finish, which is go down to the parking garage and get in my car here in Newark and drive back to Jersey City. And as I crest the top of one of the bridges that I go across, you see the enormity of the Manhattan skyline. And the
Hmm.
first time I did that leaving work one night, I was like, how the hell did this happen?
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
how did
I thought of
how
you because Tracy and I were in New York about a year ago. We did around Christmas time. It was just wonderful. I love the history of the city, and I thought of you as like, Terry, he's here now. Working in
yeah
New Jersey for the orchestra.
yeah
Just magical. Yeah.
it is magical. This is a tough industry. I tell my family when I was home recently, I was like, how's the job going? I'm like, the job is tough. It is, people who don't know this industry or this ecosystem probably find it just weird that you would sit in a concert hall and listen to 60, 70, 80 musicians, on a stage playing a piece of music with, some crazy person with a baton in front of them. And it's magical. And until you see it, experience and hear it, it's almost impossible to describe because there's nuance and texture
Yeah.
and creativity and
And a lot of
energy.
the kids probably think it's like recorded. Oh, they're playing a recording through
My
speakers,
point I
and
was about to
yeah,
make that you're not going to get
yeah,
from a recording. You can
yeah.
get it, but seeing it happen, it's like watching an orchestra perform live on stage or watching a singer perform live on stage as opposed to a recording of that singer. There's just nuance, emotion, and texture that's not going to come through in a recording.
Hmm.
Recording can be off the charts, and I find myself now that I'm sitting in the chair, sitting in our concert sometimes and just almost out of my seat because I'm leaning in so much, hanging on to every note that's played because one, I'm a nerd when it comes to music, but it moves you. It's like, you know,
Absolutely.
if
Yeah.
I were my failed attempt at, it wasn't really an attempt. My thought during COVID of going to what's the big guitar stores?
Guitar Center.
Going to Guitar Center there on
Yeah.
75
Yeah.
and during COVID, and I'm like, I'm going to go buy an acoustic guitar and I'm just going to learn how to play guitar during COVID. It made a lovely piece of furniture
Some laundry on the guitar stand.
on the guitar stand. Yeah. But because I sing, Brazilian music is probably my favorite. I love bossa novas. And so that was the catalyst. I'm gonna play some Joe Beam on the guitar and accompany myself singing. Never happened. Um, but to be able to go from a classical music venue listening to an orchestra to and understanding the nuance and the creativity and the energy it takes to do that, because a lot of I had a conversation with a donor in Dallas once at a concert during intermission whose wife is on the board of the DSO, and the husband has to get pulled around to go to these concerts. And he came up to me and he goes, Terry, I don't get it. It's like, if you've heard Beethoven's Fifth performed by Dallas and you've heard, New York do it, you've heard LA do it, what have you. I don't get it. The notes on the page are the same. Y'all are just spending all this money with all these people to do the same stuff that anyone else can do. And I said, well, that's not true. And he's a big country western guy. He goes, well, what do you mean? I'm like, there's huge differences between one band, so to speak, to the next. I said, so you're a big country western guy. What's your favorite country western song? He said Crazy. And I'm like, okay, whose rendition of Crazy do you like the most? And of course, the simplest answer is Patsy Cline. I was like, okay, well, that's not a good example because, Willie Nelson wrote Crazy, and
Right.
no one else had success with it like Patsy Cline did. I said, but let's say that, Waylon Jennings, Willie Nelson, Tanya Tucker, Reba McEntire did Crazy. Your favorite is still Patsy. So let's say it's Reba. So you've got the classic, quintessential Patsy Cline's version of Crazy and Reba's. The notes on the page that they're doing the music from is the same. Difference is going to be the interpretation of the music.
Yeah.
So, yes, if you're going to play Beethoven's Fifth, the notes on the page are the same, but each orchestra has a life and an energy and a style that's its own. So that makes it uniquely different. You know, I can listen to my orchestra. If you blindfolded me, listen to my orchestra and listen to Dallas, and I could tell you immediately which one was which. And they can be playing my favorite symphony is Tchaikovsky's Fifth, and I know every note of every movement. And you know that nuance is, you know, some orchestras will play it a little slower, some will play it a little faster.
And how they're
But
feeling, right? Like how the individual musician's feeling that
yeah,
night.
yeah,
Yeah, the energy
and the
they're putting into it.
conductor's ability to get
Yeah.
what they need from that particular interpretation of a piece. Um, but more importantly, how is your audience engaging with that?
Yeah.
And if you brought your kids, you know, what are they? You know, are they hearing something like, you know, 6 or 7, 8-year-old Terry Loftis at music hall heard and said, you know, I want to do that. I don't know how long or what it's going to look like, but I know I want to go do that. And that is a direct correlation to where I am sitting today. And
Mhm.
I don't kid myself on that. You know, I would not be sitting where I am if it hadn't been for that early beginning of, you know, Mom, I want to learn how to play this instrument. Never thinking that I would do this again. You know, my goal was to get through Taka and probably go back into the for-profit sector somewhere, not to stay in the nonprofit sector. And here we are. But as hectic and challenging as this job can be, and it is, because fundraising never stops. You know, there's always something with cash flow.
Mhm.
But one of the things that I don't worry about when I go to bed at night is the quality and relevance of the musicians that are on that stage, and my music director, and the commitment and dedication of the people who work in the office who make all of this happen. But it is, to say it's herding cats is an understatement. It is one of the things that I've often said, and I shouldn't say this because this is going to be broadcast, but I am going to convince either Amazon or Netflix to accept a storyboard that I'm working on what it takes to run a symphony orchestra. It'd be a hell of a documentary because there's so many moving parts to what people don't see from the perspective of an audience, and just the day-to-day chaos that exists in doing what we do.
It's obvious that you put together an amazing team, and they recruited you to come in and lead the organization. I love the fact that you're talking about innovation. When you think of the symphony, you probably don't think of innovation pretty quickly, right? You're thinking of the classics and it's the arts, but how do we make this classic better and continue to be relevant? All the things you've talked about.
Yeah.
I think that is tip of the spear, pushing that innovation curve forward, taking this art form that has been around for a long, long time. How can we continue to make it better with the people around us and then connect with new audiences, but also continue doing what people expect, in this
Yeah, and
particular art form.
innovation comes in, as you know, in a lot of different forms. One of the things that
Yeah.
appealed to me about this job was the fact that, you know, the New Jersey Symphony was the first major symphony in the United States to hire an African American music director, 1968.
Wow.
That's remarkable.
Yeah, it is.
His name is Henry Lewis, was a classically trained bassist. His ex-wife and now widow is the opera singer Marilyn Horne. And before he became music director here, he was the assistant conductor at the LA Phil in the 60s. So this organization has frequently been on the forefront of innovation, and artistically, the sound and quality of the orchestra. My music director now, Shin Jung, who is sadly leaving me to move to Seattle. The 28th season will be here last season with us.
Good run. Very good
Yeah, I
run.
mean, 10 years with the orchestra, an amazing human, and a brilliant conductor. So there are these silver bullets along the way that make the chaos make sense. But it is at my age, um, making a move like this and taking on something like this was, I won't say the decision was easy, but it was something that It was another one of those things over the course of my very interesting career to where I could say that I haven't done before.
Yeah. And
And
that's
so,
why I've had you on my list to interview for quite some time now because I wanted this story and there's so much. I mean, I could interview you for 4 hours. I've had conversations with adults, my graduate students about this particular topic. One job or one thing or one season in your life does not define you. And what you just described and the story you told us is a perfect example of that because you went from loving music, being inspired, going into advertising and media. You and I worked together in that space. We worked in education. And in that entire experience, it comes down to those relationships and that pivoting, like you said, right? And going on to that next thing. And you're bringing that same energy into, a new medium. And in this case, it's the symphony orchestra. And it's just compelling story. It's a beautiful story because again, it's not one thing that defines you. And you're a perfect
right.
example of that.
I come from a generation, and you're behind me, um, where the notion was, for my parents and my grandparents, go to school, get a good job, and if you do it right, you can retire from that job, have the good life. The idea of me, and this is from a kid till now, staying in one thing for the whether my life had spanned 12 years or whether it goes to 90 was just a ridiculous notion to me. I'm like,
I'm with you. Yeah, I'm the same way.
there's so many things that presented themselves to me, some that made sense, some that didn't. That, if I were to ever write a book, people would probably not believe it because of all of the things that I've done. And how I had to learn from some of the big failures because this has not been a walk in the park. And if we're paying attention to ourselves and the story and the narrative that we're not only telling ourselves, but that we're believing, that dictates the future.
Yes. Yeah.
I could have easily, after my first little marketing company failed, decided I was a failure. It didn't work. I'm going to lick my wounds and go back to banking or go back and see if I can be manager of that grocery store. It was like, no, I really want to learn this. And if I want to learn it, I've got to go somewhere where I can learn. It's a blow to your ego when you're in your 20s and think you're hot stuff and you're going to conquer the world. But at each step forward, there were several steps back. Coming here was tough. I could have stayed in Dallas. I could have gone to LA to an opportunity there for a lot more money, but it would have been a lateral move. And this was uniquely different because it was an orchestra that I love and it was the top job. And at this point in my career, that's the only thing that appeals to me. And so when I am asked and have been asked, what does retirement look like for me? My typical answer is whomever's with me, and hopefully it's my partner, John, whoever's with me that pushes the button at the crematorium when they when they light me up, that's my retirement plan.
I can not imagine you not working or being involved with some project, whether it's volunteering
Now,
or serving a board or a job. I do agree with that.
life would be too boring to just
Yeah.
sit somewhere and not do this. Yeah.
Gosh. Yeah. And I can't wait to, whether I'm up there and I would love to come to one of the performances, or if you're back here in Dallas, we definitely need to spend more time together. What piece of advice would you give somebody? And I ask this quite often to the guests that I've interviewed because we've heard the impact that music has had on you, but you going down this journey and having to pivot and meeting these different people and forming these relationships and collaborating with other artists. When you met Robert Duvall, and I saw your social media post recently because he just passed, incredible artist, actor. Tommy Lee Jones, people you've been involved with, Booker T. Washington. You've been around people of influence that have provided other people with advice, and you've heard some of these stories. What's some advice you have based on your journey in your career, whether it's in the music or just persevering when things get tough, or you're that kid when you feel like, you know what, this is my life. This is all it's ever going to be. What's that answer?
This is going to sound kind of cliche, but it's true. It is a recognition and acceptance of who you are, where you are, but also knowing that where you are is going to change and that each of us is responsible for our own destiny, whether you're a person of faith or not. There is not some deity somewhere on a throne with the book of life and an endless supply of number two tip pencils dictating everything that happens to us. There is something there that has a lot of influence. It may not be what has been told to us, and God knows, I hope it's a lot more comprehensive than that. But it's an acceptance of who you are, knowing that life is ever changing, and to learn from the small victories and from the huge mistakes. But more than anything else is to accept oneself as they are. This journey is going to be ever changing, and if we are paying attention and listening to ourselves, um, we will gain a level of confidence to know that whether I knocked grocery stores in my banking career, there's nothing wrong with either of those. There's nothing wrong with the people that I worked with at Tum Thum, who was the general manager of the store, provided for his family, put his kids through college. It was his thing. And that's what people who are in banking, some that I worked with who are still in banking to this day, it's their thing. It's what they felt was their calling. And maybe that's what it is to give yourself credit, listen to yourself, and recognize what that calling is, but also that it's changing. You know, not everyone's going to be like me to where, it's like squirrel. I haven't done that before, and an opportunity presents itself to go do it. They're never
Yeah.
easy, but I accepted the situations that were tough growing up. I wouldn't be here, but I knew, as did my mom, and raising us, that there was something better, um, but it was not going to be given to us.
Yeah.
There's not a book
It wasn't somebody
somewhere.
out there is going to save you, right? They're not going to be out there saving you. It is you putting the work and
Yeah,
you taking that step forward.
the universe puts people and situations in our path that are for our good, and also some that are not. And some of those hardest lessons have been from people that I thought had my back in some of my ventures and didn't. And they've been hard lessons to learn. Instead of wallowing in that, you take from that what you're supposed to, and you get up and you keep going, because in my case, failure is not an option. And I went through too much at a very young age for that ever to be applicable in my life moving forward, because it's like, this does not feel good. We don't want to do that again. So what can we do, and how can we use our relationships in family, our personal relationships? I've never wanted to be a parent. That's something that I think is an enormous responsibility that are made for some people, but not for me. But I love every kid that's in our program are incredible. And I was dealing with this situation that I have going on with my mom, and friend of mine yesterday, when I was heading to the airport, called and said how wonderful it was that I came down to check on mom and to make sure that I'm there. And he said, "So what's going to happen when you're not here? What does that look like for you?" And I'm like, "One, hopefully a beach somewhere on the other side." I said, "But I've spent my life building relationships. And the only thing that I would tell my friends, if I were doing a video that's going to play once the crematorium is cooled down, at some point, I'm going to pop into your head and just smile and remember something that we experienced together, because my impact is rooted in what did I do to help not only advance my family, but everyone around me. How
Yeah.
am I doing that here?
Yes. I
My
think we
sis
always have to think about that. At the end of the day, who have we impacted? Did I make a point to help somebody? And I don't know if I ever told you this face to face, and what a great opportunity now, but I just want to tell you thank you for helping me back in my early career when I transitioned from film and media to full-time education, because that time that you and I worked together at the college, and your marketing firm, I don't know if I told you thank you, but you really impacted me during those years, because you always supported me and you knew the challenges that we faced to grow that program when I was program director. But I'm very grateful for that. You
well,
impacted me, and I can see that that is a core thread in your personality, and I love that about you, and I've learned that from you as well.
well, I appreciate that. And I think the value of a person's worth is not rated in the jobs they've had or the, money they earned. It is those personal connections. And I remember telling my assistant at the Dallas Symphony, I brought over from Taka when I got to the DSO, and it's like, you're going to take me to New Jersey. I'm like, no, love you as I do. You cannot spend the rest of your career as my assistant. Your career needs to advance and move forward. And I will do everything to help make that happen. And of course, he stayed and he got a promotion and is doing quite well. And it's genuine on my part. I genuinely like helping people. So if people think back on me and it's like, well, he had a crazy laugh, and he when I needed that support, he was there.
Yeah, you were.
And
Absolutely.
yeah, it means a lot to me to give back in any way that I can, because I had a lot of folks that helped my mom and us when we were growing up, to where that's the core of what I do. And I think that's why I've ended up in nonprofit at this point in my career, because it does allow me to use my skill set in a different way than I would in a for-profit setting. And we get taken care of if we're doing it for the right reasons. We're able to sustain ourselves and take care of ourselves. There are days I miss my for-profit income working for a nonprofit, but God, the work that I do, and to see the impact that it's
Yeah.
having,
Yeah. So
especially in the
special.
community and with kids, is remarkable.
Yeah. Oh my, and that's when you see somebody fall in love with music or whatever project you're working on, that's where it really starts to like remind you, okay, when you're having a bad day, think about that one individual that is having a better day because of that one decision or that one thing that you decided to do. That's how I, fell in love with education, both at the high school level, college level, and now graduate level. And then doing this with Halfway, I just want to hear people's stories. I want to hear about that impact, hear about the struggles, the friction, all of that, how they pivoted. And it's not always about the big celebrity or the big story. It's the spaces in between, the people in between, those stories that you don't often hear about that I think are extremely powerful. Connecting with that one person, all of a sudden that one person's life has changed and it just turns into something that they could have never imagined. And they have this great impact on the world. So it's very special. But incredibly thankful for your time. And like I said, we could talk for hours, and there's so many other questions I have for you. Maybe we'll have to do a round two in the future. But I know you want to get home tonight. You're on the East Coast. But I definitely owe you dinner, lunch, something when we get together, and would love to see you face to face. And just
Next time
grateful
I'm
for
there,
doing this.
I'll give you advance warning so that
Absolutely.
I don't get
And
tied down.
absolutely. Yeah. And please, best wishes for your mom. I know that's,
Thank you.
it's never easy watching our parents get older. And just definitely thinking of her and anything you need. Don't be afraid to reach out.
I'm definitely a mama's boy, so she's got all of my heart. Yeah.
Same. Well, Terry, thank you so much. And let's do this again sometime. And for the New Jersey Symphony Orchestra, wishing the most success. And can't wait to see a show sometime when I'm up.
I was
on
going to
the East
say,
Coast.
you tell me when you're going to come up, and I'll make sure that you guys have a great experience.
I would love it. My wife would love it as well. So, well, thank you, sir.
All right, my
And
friend.
it's great for your time. I'll see you very, very soon.
Sounds good.
See ya.
Bye-bye.